Borrowed Time, which is Lennon's last decade. It's a documentary. Katherine Ellis down the end, Max Ellis in the middle, like the sandwich filling that he is.
Ooh, I like it in the middle.
Tasty.
So which one's the meat and which one's the pickle?
Well,
Vegan meat, obviously.
Layer. You need 4 of us if you're going to meat, pickle, and bread. Otherwise, it's
unless it's an open sandwich. Can't
wait.
it be a scone? I'll be the cream, and I go on top. Let me tell you that now.
So this is a documentary from Alan G. Parker, who also made films called Hello Quo, Love Kills, The Story of Sid and the Pistols, and it was 50 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper and Beyond. So he's obviously done a Beatles documentary before. I think, according to him, this is his most personal documentary to date. It runs at just over 2 hours.
It felt like several days I was watching it for.
Maybe I should say from the start then, disclaimer, big flashing lights. I'm not the world's biggest John Lennon or Beatles fan. In fact, I didn't really care for the Beatles. I know that's quite controversial.
Well,
a lot of people probably... Were you the same, Catherine? Were you ever into the Beatles?
No, I love the Beatles. I thought it was too long. When it says personal, I would change that for self-indulgent. I'm questioning who it's actually for. I think if you're a hardcore nerd and you knew a lot already, great. But there was no narrator, there was no background. It assumed that the viewer knew a lot. And if you didn't, then, it was a bit... I don't know, I just thought it lacked flow, it lacked continuity. It was very anti-Yoko.
It's funny you should say about the continuity, though. There were a couple of things that I thought were wrong with it at the beginning. One was the use of music. I know we'll come on to, the copyright music, because obviously if you're going to do a John Lennon documentary, it should perhaps have his music. That wasn't really the main issue for me, but I thought the music was too loud at the beginning for the first 20 minutes or so. There was music underneath the dialogue. Luckily, that did change as the documentary went on. You could just hear the voices, and that was the voices on their own. I don't think you needed anything else.
But I mean, a lot of the people who are supposed to, it's personal, are supposed to have known him. They're basically journalists, and some of them, their knowing him amounted to, I had a piss next to him once. It's like,
that was quite funny, because that guy that was telling that story, he told another story, and that involved going to the toilet with John Lennon. He did actually make fun of that and said, it sounds like all my stories talking about going to the toilet with John Lennon. It
was basically a selection of interviews from journalists who inevitably are all quite old. In fact, there were a lot of RIP so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so at the end, because they've obviously died since the film was made, because John Lennon was, killed 45 years ago. So inevitably, anyone who's left who can remember anything is going to be probably quite elderly. But I just think it was too long. And the other thing is, the first time somebody spoke, there'd be a heading saying what their name was and who they were. But then it wasn't repeated.
You need some kind of narrative. You need a sort of sensible voice, like Whispering Bob, to do a narrative or over the whole thing.
Do you know, he was definitely a highlight. I think he was one of the best talking heads actually in this. Yeah. I kind of disagree with you with the people that were involved, because I kind of like it that it was. I mean, a few of them were friends, but mainly they were journalists, weren't they? Music journalists or reporters, so I suppose journalists have got a different story.
There were 2 women interviewed, and one of them was footage of Auntie Mimi, who was a family member. And I think that other than that, there was one other woman, and everybody was a sort of news person of some sort.
Yeah, because I think Whispering Bob Harris, I think he gave some really good stories. He's brilliant. And also I think he's a bit more, he's a bit less worried about the media side of it. He doesn't need to justify himself, I don't think.
Because they had one salient point. In each one, they had a point they were trying to get across. But half of it was just them, forgetting what they were saying and burbling.
I suppose I suppose they'd have to be a little bit self-indulgent to tell the story, to put themselves in that situation, because that's what they were doing at the time with that job.
That's not really my point. My point is that they weren't capable of that. They weren't broadcasters. You say they were journalists, but they didn't seem to have any kind of real editorial sense, like Bob Harris does. And there's a couple of others that kind of could talk and were worthy of, you know, a lengthy period of the program. Whereas the rest of them could have just been in sound bites and then had a narrator doing the rest, saying what they were going to say, clearing up some of the mystery, actually linking the clips, which I didn't really feel linked very well either.
Oh, see, I did.
Did you?
Yeah, I thought it had real continuity because it felt like they were telling stories in a chronological sense. So obviously, apart from the beginning, started. It felt like it was running up to his death. So I suppose it touched on his attitudes throughout the 70s and the fact that he was quite depressed, and he was obviously when he left the Beatles, and a lot of that I didn't know. So I found that quite interesting because I'd never really paid much attention to the Beatles. I don't believe a lot of it's true.
I think of a lot of it. I don't think he was a very nice person, and he was quite abusive and unpleasant. And it was kind of the way that Yoko was kind of sidelined and sat in the background, didn't get to say anything.
For the Lost Weekend, when he went off with was it May, the woman that he had an affair with?
One, you know, is I don't know. I think he's
the story I'd heard about that was that she basically set him up with her friend because she didn't want to lose him, so she sent him off with her friend to have an affair, and then he went back to her. But all those journalists was like, oh well, of course you had to go back to Yoko, and she'd just say, well, he's not free, and you think, poor old Yoko, you know, she's sort of. Are we saying that John Lennon was such a weak character that Yoko wouldn't let, you know, annexed him from his bandmates and all his friends and wouldn't let people speak to him? Or did she just get the brunt of it because he just, you know, just said, oh, tell him I can't be asked, you know, like a kind of manager would. And I don't know, because on the one hand they were saying, you know, he was almost godlike and how incredible it was when they met him and how amazing he was. And then on the other hand, they were sort of saying that this woman had, you know, somehow turned him against everybody and they couldn't get a look in. And I just don't believe that was the case.
It's fine if you're a fan and you really respect someone's work, you are bound to feel a little bit like that if you get the chance to interview. I mean, I've interviewed a few people before and I've been so, I don't know, really grateful for the opportunities, but I suppose you do feel quite overwhelmed by that chance to talk with them, and I suppose Andy Peoples had those feelings as well. But I never got the impression that the documentary was, or the filmmakers were against Yoko Ono. She had a hard time at the time because
I
she
would
was
say
told
they were
she was
because
ugly.
They've chosen to edit it completely negatively about her.
But
they've got nothing positive
to
say about her.
But do you think the talking heads were speaking negatively about her, or just what was happening at the time?
The whole film and everybody that mentioned Yoko was very anti-Yoko. Yoko got him into smack. Yoko annexed him from the band. Yoko wouldn't let him speak to us. He never got this message because Yoko was in the way, and Yoko this, Yoko that. And no one actually had a good word to say about her. And I just think they were happy. They had a child, you know, they did a lot of work together, whatever you think of her work or their work. And I just think it's quite insulting to be so unkind about his partner because it makes it sound like he had no backbone.
Yeah, and I suppose when Double Fantasy came out, they didn't like her being on that album, which was strange because obviously he did want her to be on that album because obviously they were a couple, so it was like a joint effort, wasn't it? But I suppose the press at the time felt disappointed that she was included on that album. It was like a joint effort and a lot of the tracks were hers.
What a terrible album, though.
I don't see. One of my favourite songs from the 80s is "Walking on Thin Ice," which obviously came out in 1980, which was obviously just after I think he got shot. It was released just after, and that's one of my favourite tracks. I just love that song, Yoko Ono, "Walking on Thin Ice." Brilliant.
I don't really know. I've tried to listen to the Beatles, and on several occasions, and just find them unbearable and boring.
Isn't it partly because it was played in your home at a time when...
Not especially. I mean, it wasn't
weren't
music
great.
played in my home at all. Obviously there was I found it depressing. A lot of it was quite just, I don't know, it was a combination of being sort of cheesy crap and depressing with kind of, and it was just something that didn't speak to me at all.
Yeah, because some of the songs are overly happy, aren't they? A lot of their songs as well, particularly in the first part of their career.
Yeah, some of that's
really and some chirpy. Of it's quite old-time musical, that they're when I get older, losing my hair. I don't like everything they've done, but I mean, I do think they've written some of the most amazing songs ever. Just incredible. And the chord structures and everything. I don't know. And their voices, and Paul McCartney's voice is amazing.
Okay, so this is interesting. We're not the biggest Beatles fans, perhaps. Katherine, you probably like them more than Max and I do. But for this documentary, I did get quite a bit from it. So I found that quite interesting, the stories they were telling, because I didn't really know much about his life at all, really. Only bits that, was really
I'm
well
not sure this is an unbiased presentation. I don't think this is an accurate representation of what he was like at all. I just feel it was so biased and so fanboy that I just didn't really get anything from it. I couldn't, and a lot of the people, I mean, there was no one objective. Whispering Bob, he's the only person I trusted in it.
We watched it in 3 sessions because Max would get to a point where he'd go, "Oh God, I can't stand any more of this."
See, I never felt like that at all. I was quite surprised because I'd heard that you were finding it a bit of a slog before I watched it, and I watched it in 2 parts, but that's not because it was long, but because we watched it and it was quite late, and then I came back to it the next morning. But I never found it a slog, to be honest. I found there was a lot to entertain me.
Did do something about the Sex Pistols. I haven't seen that, I don't think. Have you seen the Sex Pistols one that he did?
No, but I'm keen to see. I mean, because
I've never heard of it.
I mean, it's interesting because you're saying you're not a Beatles fan, Phil, or a John Lennon film, and you found it informative and you learnt a lot. Whereas, I mean, I don't know. I probably know more about them than you do. However, I felt that I needed more information. And as Max said, I think if there'd been some sort of narrator just to sort of fill in certain points and just give a little bit of history. Because the other thing is, if we want to keep John Lennon's life alive or memory alive and keep him, fresh perhaps in younger people's minds, I mean, what is there in that documentary for them? He had an opportunity there to give a bit of background, like, more about who the Beatles actually were, with maybe someone like Whispering Bob narrating and film clips. So it's not just wall-to-wall interviews. So he basically tried to tell the whole story with interviews, and I think it was just too much.
You're not getting music clips because obviously for copyright, I'm guessing for copyright reasons. Why?
I mean, I've never seen a music documentary about a band or a person in music that doesn't have any of their music in it ever. I mean, he was primarily a musician. And that's all he was. I mean, he did a bit of freedom fighting and ironically women's rights and things, but I do think that he's a musician and you need that musical context to reflect it. When they're talking about an album that came out in bits and pieces, that you can't really have a music documentary without it.
I guess it's cost, isn't it? It must cost a fortune. Oh yeah, I could have done without the gunshots as well. Do you remember at the beginning they're telling, they're kind of harking back to when he died, and there was a sound of gunshots, and I thought, nobody needs that. Everybody knows that he was shot and killed. That was just over 2 hours. I think it was 2 hours 10, that documentary. But fans can also enjoy a 3.5 hour director's cut of this, streaming on Amazon Prime video channels or standalone app. A few of the people were welling up when they were retelling their stories, because I guess they were there, weren't they? So they saw firsthand. Don't know.
They're welling up a lot, weren't they? I mean, it's 45 years ago.
I'm never to have a piss in the urinals with him again.
So I dread to think what these star ratings are going to be. Katherine Ellis, we'll go to you first.
I'm going to give it 2.
I was going to give it. If she'd given it 1, I would have given it 0. If I'm giving it 1,
I don't know. All right, well, you're making me think now. Why am I giving it 2?
No, stay with 2.
Okay, 1.5.
You can't do halves. No, the days of halves are over.
No, I don't think they are.
You had your time with halves. And quarters.
Hell.
You did a quarter once. I was like,
you.
she really is taking the piss now. She's not content with halves. She's chopping off the halves as well.
I'm going to give it 11.5%.
I'm going for 3.
You know, you're saying you didn't know anything about the Beatles, but lots of people were being mentioned. I had no idea who they were. Like other members of the Beatles I'd never heard of and things like that. And, you know, I mean, I know who George Epstein is, and didn't I spend an evening in the box with the Beatles once, and I didn't know in Royal Albert Hall.
Did you?
George Martin. I think I went to see a thing at the Royal Albert Hall with Jonathan Ross and George Martin. And I didn't know who he was.
Have we lost Katherine? She seems to have frozen. She's smiling though, so I'm.
Or is she an interviewee on this podcast? She could be one of the narrators.
Can you rush into her room and just poke her just to check that she's still alive? Because she seems to have passed out on us. Hello? Hello?
At least she's smiling, Phil.
Oh, she's actually disappeared completely now.
I'm back! I froze. Yes, Max he went to some knobby concert with Jonathan Ross, and he spent the evening in a box with not John Martin.
No, George Martin.
George Martin.
Wow.
And Tim Burton.
And Tim Burton. And he had no idea who they were.
I mean, I don't think I was thinking about it really. It's just some people.
Wasted on you.
I was chatting to their other halves. That was nice. But I don't
see. You're not starstruck, are you, Max?
Well, I might have been more. I do like Tim Burton. So, and this was after. I think it was before or just about when his first Batman came out. So it was after Pee Wee Herman, which I'm a huge fan of. So
yeah,
you know, that was.
I think the only time I've seen you remotely starstruck actually is when I was doing some TV thing and we went into the green room and David Attenborough was in there. Do you remember that, Max? And you said, "Oh, yeah. I wish you were my dad." Got a picture of him with you. I wonder who'd make me pass out if they were in my box.
Ooh. She's going to start slapping me again in a minute if I start saying
stop it, Max. Don't. You said we'd drawn a line under that. I got a bit merry the other night and Max said that his most attractive celebrity that he'd ever seen was Katherine, and then he said Zeta-Jones, so I slapped him on the face. It's fair enough, isn't it?
In the flesh, she's magnetic, I would say.
Really?
Yeah. I met Björk once. She was tiny, like a doll.
Well, George Michael, I've interviewed George Michael. That was quite the story. Don't know if I've ever told you this, Max. He was talking about the photo that you took of me, which was just half of my face. And he said, you've copied me with the half the face thing. I laughed because I thought, oh, shit, yeah, actually I might have done, or Max might have done. But then he said, you look much better in the flesh. And I, don't tell Max that. Because the photo's meant to make you look better. But no, he did like the photos. He did tell me he liked the photos. So there you go.
Gosh.
But he said I nicked the idea.
Sade.
She's gorgeous.
Absolutely stunning. Feline. Her brother married a very close friend of mine. And when we all lived in Ladbroke Grove, we used to have dinner sometimes. I went to her house. But she was, just absolutely stunning. I had that kind of, aura about her.
Yeah.
So did Belinda Carlisle, actually.
Well, it's good to see you. Do you want to say goodbye?
Guess what? Right. Max has actually uploaded his T-shirts. He's got a page.
Not many of them. Yeah, Pagan Gothic.
You've had about 10 commissions today, haven't you?
I have. From the gym, so I might have to change the name. Perhaps it should be Pagan Gothic Fitness.
Fabulous. And Katherine, you got a single out as well with Revival House Project. So I'll put the links for that down below and for Max's clothes.
Guess
buying,
what,
everyone.
Phil? I'm going to Monaco with Russell Small. I mean, Russell and I, would you believe, have been working together for
30 years.
16 years? No, longer than that.
Yeah.
It's about, nearly 20 years. We're doing a gig in a club in Monaco, and then we're doing a gig on a private yacht, darling, the next day.
Oh, take lots of pics. Send us a video
I've
if
got
you
going.
can. Max is looking after the kids and the animals.
Yeah, I'm looking after the worms or the lawn.
We don't have any kids
Squirrels.
to look after anymore.
No,
They're looking
they look
after
after
us,
me.
if anything. Gulliver's in the band. Zebedee's a
Yeah.
tattoo artist. Skull Time on Instagram.
We'll push it all. Good to see you.
Oh, Phil, you are kind.
I
Right,
am.
I'm
I'm
going
a
back to the
sweetheart.
pictures. Love you all. Bye.
See you
I
soon.
love you all.
Bye.
Oh, he's gone.